It's often said that some of the most fascinating Hollywood stories belong to those who were never quite as famous on their own as they were for their associations with bigger names. In the case of Lady Sylvia Ashley, it was easy for the world to define her simply by her high-profile marriages to iconic figures like Douglas Fairbanks and Clark Gable. But if you look a bit deeper, you discover a woman who dared to dream beyond her station, a social climber, some might say, but also someone with real charm, ambition, and resilience. Picture this: a young girl born into modest means who over time married into nobility, mingled with Hollywood's biggest stars, and finally became an indelible part of its golden age tapestry. That alone is enough to turn heads. Yet her life story is far more than a string of last names. She had her own trials, heartbreaks, illusions shattered, and a final act that left friends and family alike with more questions than answers. Let's settle in to explore the life of Lady Sylvia Ashley with a mixture of curiosity, empathy, and a genuine desire to see beyond the headlines. Her story begins in early 20th century England. She was born Edith Louisa Sylvia Hawkes. Some sources vary on the exact year, but 1904 is typically cited. If you think of London in the early 1900s, you'll envision gaslit streets, horse-drawn carriages giving way to motor cars, and an undercurrent of excitement as the city moved firmly into modernity. King Edward VII had recently passed, and the social structure of the United Kingdom was all about class distinction, ornate etiquette, and deference to aristocracy. That was the environment into which Sylvia arrived. Her family was no aristocratic dynasty. They were ordinary folks navigating a world where social mobility was hard won. Her father wasn't wealthy, and her mother, by most accounts, came from a family of modest means too. It would have been easy for Sylvia to remain obscured by the strict social hierarchies of the time, content to follow a predictable path. But even from childhood, she showed the kind of flair for making an impression that suggested bigger ambitions. Sylvia often told friends she remembered being enthralled by the British stage as a little girl. Now, we don't have a meticulous record of every childhood detail, but accounts from acquaintances at the time suggest she was always the sort who gravitated towards style and glamour. Whether it was rummaging through her mother's older dresses or sneaking into the local theater just to watch people come in and out, she displayed a curiosity for what lay outside her own day-to-day life. That might seem a small detail, but for a young girl in Edwardian London, harboring any dream of mingling with nobility or rubbing elbows with internationally famous film stars would have sounded like pure fantasy. Still, little Sylvia hung on to that desire, or so the anecdotes go. She was restless, often daydreaming about an existence grander than her own. As Sylvia entered her teenage years, the world changed dramatically. The First World War cast a long shadow over Britain. Families were losing fathers, sons, and brothers. Rationing was a reality. Society was shaken to its core. And yet in the midst of this upheaval, new roles opened up for women. While we don't have a complete day-by-day account of Sylvia's wartime life, it's clear that she was part of that generation of women who saw some of their personal horizons expanded. She saw that if she wanted to improve her standing, perhaps there were new avenues: modeling, stage work, or rubbing elbows with folks who had influence. She was noted for her beauty, and she definitely knew how to make the most of it. Some say she caught the eye of a photographer while strolling through London in her late teens, though the exact details are murky. It was the kind of chance discovery that was sometimes romanticized in the papers. A lovely young woman spotted and launched into the glamorous world of modeling. She did do a bit of modeling, or at least society columns in later Hollywood gossip magazines, would mention her earlier stints posing for fashion ads, though the specifics remain elusive. But these early forays into that realm helped her develop a sense of poise, an ability to turn heads, and a knack for conversation with upper-crust patrons who might commission certain fashion shoots or parties. It was in those gatherings that she started meeting people far above her family's original social rank. By the early 1920s, the silent film era was in full swing, and Hollywood, though thousands of miles away, loomed large in the world's imagination. Every aspiring star in Europe dreamed of crossing the Atlantic to see if the silver screen might embrace them. Sylvia, though, found her own route to a bigger stage. She spent time in social circles that included minor British aristocrats, frequently attending parties that straddled the line between bohemian art gatherings and high society soirees. There's a story, told by a longtime London socialite, that Sylvia once waltzed into a party wearing an outfit that was too flashy for some tastes. But she carried herself with such confidence that one observer declared she looked less like an invited guest and more like she owned the place. That was Sylvia. She might have come from an ordinary background, but she had no qualms about reaching for the extraordinary. Her first big brush with genuine aristocracy came in 1927. She had caught the attention of Anthony Ashley Cooper, the 9th Earl of Shaftesbury. Now, this was no small thing. The Ashley Cooper family line had centuries of history behind it, a lineage that came with estates, servants, and a robust sense of traditional British nobility. Their whirlwind courtship made headlines in some corners of the British press. Of course, there were polite society folks who frowned upon the match, wondering how the daughter of an unremarkable family could ever fit into one of Britain's most storied aristocratic families. Sylvia, however, had that rare combination of beauty and charm that proved irresistible to the 9th Earl, and the wedding went forward. She became Lady Ashley. As a new member of the aristocracy, she found her name in high society columns that speculated endlessly about her personal life, everything from her sense of fashion to her social skills. Some reporters complimented her for being graceful and outgoing. Others deemed her a grasping social climber. Sylvia, for her part, treated the gossip with a casual smile, never letting it derail her from enjoying her new station. For a short while, Sylvia seemed to settle into the role of an aristocrat's wife. She certainly enjoyed the trappings of the title, the extravagant dinners, the weekend hunts, the lavish parties. But her restlessness still lingered beneath the surface. Friends noted that she was more drawn to the glitz of the era's entertainment world than to the stuffy drawing rooms of her in-laws' social set. Ultimately, the marriage wasn't destined to last. Her union with the 9th Earl of Shaftesbury ended in 1934. News of their separation swirled with rumors of incompatibility and Sylvia's longing for a more dynamic, less tradition-bound life. In any event, the divorce cemented her status as an independent figure. Lady Ashley remained her moniker, and she was more than content to keep it. Within a few years, Sylvia's restless spirit guided her straight to Hollywood's front door. It was around this time that she made the acquaintance of Douglas Fairbanks. He was already a legendary star, an actor whose swashbuckling roles and trademark grin made him one of the highest paid and most beloved leading men of the silent era. He had been married to Mary Pickford in what the press had deemed one of Hollywood's greatest love stories. The fact that he eventually divorced Mary and that Sylvia ended up marrying him in 1936 made sensational headlines on both sides of the Atlantic. For the British press, it was an astonishing second act for the former Edith Louisa Sylvia Hawkes. For the Hollywood press, it was a new twist in the ongoing saga of Douglas Fairbanks's romantic life. Their marriage, though glamorous, was beset by tensions from the start. Fairbanks was older and carried plenty of emotional baggage from his previous marriage, while Sylvia found herself in a Hollywood environment that idolized her husband but viewed her with a mixture of awe, suspicion, and gossip-hungry curiosity. Imagine stepping into a scene with all the biggest names: Charlie Chaplin, Norma Talmadge, William Randolph Hearst, Marion Davies. These were the circles where lavish parties and complicated affairs were a regular occurrence. Sylvia came in as the new bride, overshadowed by Douglas's cinematic legacy, and overshadowed, too, by the memory of Mary Pickford's place in Fairbanks's life. The tabloids churned out rumors about tension between Sylvia and Mary, though in truth they rarely interacted after Mary and Doug's divorce was finalized. Behind closed doors, Fairbanks was reportedly moody and prone to bouts of restlessness. His health wasn't perfect either, and the dynamic free spirit he once displayed on screen had begun to wane. Friends claimed Sylvia tried her best to be supportive, occasionally suggesting that he step away from the spotlight to focus on his well-being. But Fairbanks was at heart a showman who lived for applause and adoration. There was a quiet heartbreak in the mismatch of their emotional needs. In an intimate diary entry from a close friend of Fairbanks, later sold at auction, this friend wrote that Sylvia seemed both charmed and lonely, as if unsure whether she belonged in his world or back in London. Their marriage did not last beyond a few years. They divorced in 1939, and it generated yet another wave of scandal-laden press coverage. Sylvia, unbowed, moved on. A lesser-known anecdote from this period involves an evening when Sylvia and Fairbanks hosted a dinner party that got overshadowed by the arrival of a flamboyant guest who tried to steal the spotlight. According to a surviving letter from a Hollywood socialite, Sylvia graciously let the guest perform a little impromptu song for everyone. Later in the evening, the guest criticized Sylvia's aristocratic airs. Instead of losing her temper, Sylvia calmly responded, "I left my airs in England, darling. This is Hollywood. You can be as dramatic as you please." That quip was repeated at social gatherings for weeks afterward and highlighted her ability to play the part of witty hostess even when confronted with petty insults. With the Fairbanks chapter behind her, Sylvia found herself in an interesting position. She had already been a countess, then wife to a Hollywood megastar. What could possibly come next? Over the next few years, she mingled with various high society and film industry figures, dividing her time between London, New York, and Los Angeles. Despite occasional cameo appearances in social columns, she never made a sustained attempt at a proper acting career in Hollywood. She did, however, quietly invest her energies in philanthropic activities, perhaps inspired by the charitable expectations placed on aristocratic women. She was known to attend fundraisers for war relief efforts during the early days of the Second World War, splitting her time across the Atlantic to support British causes while still maintaining a presence in American high society. In 1944, Sylvia surprised onlookers again when she married Lord Stanley of Alderley, a union that was by most accounts even shorter-lived than her previous ones. It might have been a turning point in her life because after that marriage dissolved in 1948, people began to sense she was struggling to find a lasting sense of belonging. Gossips might have labeled her flighty and commitment-averse, but there was a more human story beneath that, an unrelenting quest to find security, love, and a kind of personal identity beyond all the glitz. Those who knew her well remarked that she was a lot softer in private than her public image suggested. She had a gentle sense of humor, a warm laugh, and a ready ear for friends who confided in her. Yet each time she stepped into a new marriage or relationship, the tabloids turned her personal affairs into juicy headlines. It had to be taxing no matter how poised she appeared. And then in 1949 came the big one, Clark Gable. Even today, Gable's name is iconic. He was the king of Hollywood, the man whose portrayal of Rhett Butler in Gone with the Wind and countless other roles had cemented him as a legend of the screen. Gable had lost his beloved wife, Carole Lombard, in a tragic plane crash in 1942. He'd been through his own emotional hardships, and for a time, it looked like he might remain a grieving widower. When Sylvia Ashley entered his life, many were stunned. Gable, who carried an aura of rugged independence, seemed to have found a spark of companionship in this worldly British woman. They married in 1949, and for a brief moment, the headlines turned sweet. Clark Gable finds love again. People were curious to see if Sylvia could truly capture and heal the heart of a man who had lost so much. Initial reports described them as affectionate and supportive. They took small trips together, tried to avoid the constant Hollywood spotlight by retreating to Gable's ranch up in the San Fernando Valley. But rumors of differences and arguments soon bubbled to the surface. One close friend of Gable's supposedly confided to a gossip columnist that Sylvia was too refined for Gable's tastes. She preferred elegant dinners, while he was partial to more down-to-earth gatherings. The specter of Carole Lombard also loomed large in Gable's life. Lombard's memory was cherished not just by him, but by the public and the press. Sylvia found herself, unfairly or not, measured against an almost saintly memory. In a sad twist, it's said that she felt overshadowed, never truly sure she could occupy the same place in Gable's heart. Their marriage limped along for a few years, but by 1952, they were divorced. It's worth noting that the tabloids took a rather vicious stance during that divorce, painting Sylvia as something of a gold digger or a perpetual social climber. Newspaper columnists, always hungry for sensational angles, wrote scathing editorials about how Gable's grief over Carole Lombard meant no woman could step into that role successfully. Sylvia, for her part, rarely fired back publicly. She let the lawyers handle things. This period took an emotional toll on her. Friends would later say she spoke wistfully of wanting to settle down somewhere quiet, perhaps out of the glare of paparazzi flashbulbs. At the same time, she still enjoyed the high society life, the grand events, and the social swirl that had kept her afloat for decades. Her last marriage came in 1954 when she wed Prince Dmitri Georgiadze, a Georgian aristocrat and sportsman. This union was more discreet than her previous ones. Both Sylvia and Prince Dmitri seemed to share an understanding of how high society could both enthrall and devour a person. They made a home in the United States, occasionally traveling to Europe for extended stays. Reports suggest this final marriage, while not making huge headlines, provided Sylvia with a measure of peace. She was older by then, less eager to chase the bright lights, more interested in cultivating a private life. She took an interest in gardening, reading, and occasionally hosting intimate gatherings for friends, rather than the huge Hollywood blowouts of her earlier days. With Prince Dmitri, she at last seemed to find a partner who understood the complexities of living between worlds. Neither truly common folk nor mainstream celebrities, but two individuals who had each navigated complex social circles. Even if she wasn't seeking the spotlight, her name alone carried a certain fascination. She had once been Lady Ashley, Countess of Shaftesbury, then Mrs. Douglas Fairbanks, then married to an English lord, then Clark Gable, and finally she was princess by virtue of Prince Dimitri's title. She had spent much of her life swimming in the deep end of glamorous circles. Throughout the late 1950s, she rarely gave interviews. When she did, she was polite but vague, preferring to change the subject when asked about her past marriages. It was as if she'd grown weary of being a footnote in other people's star-studded biographies. In her later years, Sylvia's health began to decline. She largely retreated from public life, spending time in Southern California, where the climate was gentler on her ailments. A few close friends who visited her described her as gracious and warm, occasionally reminiscing about old times, stories of lavish parties, of dancing with Hollywood legends, of dressing in the finest silks in the great mansions of Britain. But there was also a tinge of sadness, a sense that she had been so close to these larger-than-life figures, yet never fully achieved a distinct legacy of her own. She admitted in a private letter to one confidant, "I've seen such splendor and such heartbreak in my time. Sometimes I don't know which made the bigger impression on me." In June of 1977, Lady Sylvia Ashley passed away in Los Angeles. She was in her early 70s, and by then, her name had drifted to the margins of popular memory. Newspapers reported her death, some referencing her marriages to famous men more than anything else. Friends mourned the loss of a woman who, they felt, never quite got her due as a person in her own right. Yet there was also a gentle wave of nostalgia, a sense that an era had ended. She was among the last connections to the days when silent screen idols ruled Hollywood, when aristocratic titles still carried a weighty mystique, and when newspapers thrived on every salacious detail of a celebrity's love life. Over time, her memory has become something of a curiosity for Hollywood historians and fans of classic cinema. She doesn't command the name recognition of a Greta Garbo or a Marlene Dietrich, nor does she rank among the top-tier socialites in British history. But for those who dig deeper, Lady Sylvia Ashley remains a striking example of a woman who traversed multiple worlds, British nobility and Hollywood stardom, philanthropic pursuits, and extravagant soirees, the search for true love, and the reality of multiple divorces. Each chapter of her life had its own cast of characters and heartbreaks, culminating in a story that was both a product of her times and a reflection of her own bold spirit. One might wonder, did the scandals overshadow her true personality, or did she somehow court them as part of her drive to remain relevant and secure? The debates continue among those who look back on old newspaper clippings and diaries. One Hollywood historian pointed out that Lady Ashley was typical of a certain group of women who capitalized on their beauty and wit to navigate the male-dominated structures of fame and aristocracy. Another scholar suggested that without her dynamic presence in social circles, some of the great parties of the era would have lacked a true hostess who knew how to cross-pollinate between aristocratic tradition and Hollywood flamboyance. There's a poignant anecdote shared by a friend who claimed to have visited her shortly before her final illness took hold. Sylvia, the friend recalled, sat in a sunlit room, flipping through an old photo album filled with images of her alongside each of her husbands at various points in time. She supposedly remarked, "I've lived so many lives in one. Sometimes I forget which one was really mine." That could be seen as a bittersweet summation of her journey, one defined by perpetual change, by adaptations from British Countess to Hollywood wife to philanthropic hostess, always seeking an elusive sense of home. In reflecting on her cultural significance, it's important to recognize that Lady Sylvia Ashley embodies a certain archetype of her era, the beautiful outsider who used her charm and connections to ascend socially and personally. She underscores the pressures that came from bridging distinct worlds, aristocratic rules and Hollywood's star machine, and how personal identity can get swept up and reshaped by celebrity culture. Her story resonates today as a reminder that many individuals who once made headlines are later reduced to passing references. And yet, if we take the time to explore their journeys, we find very human tales of longing, resilience, and heartbreak that mirror our own lives in quieter ways, Modern audiences might care about Sylvia's story because it speaks to the universal quest for belonging. She married remarkable men, but those marriages weren't fairy tale endings. She tasted the privilege and power of nobility and the dizzying allure of Hollywood fame, yet still seemed to search for stability and acceptance. Older viewers, in particular, who remember the old gossip columns, might recall how her name would crop up in discussions of Douglas Fairbanks or Clark Gable. Younger generations, meanwhile, encountering her name for the first time, might find a curiosity in how the golden age of Hollywood functioned behind the scenes, how gossip, status, and personal ambition shaped lives in ways that weren't always visible from the outside. If there's a lesson in her life, it could be that chasing glittering opportunities doesn't always guarantee contentment, and being in the orbit of the most famous stars doesn't necessarily shield one from personal heartache. Another deeper insight might be that every person, no matter how many flamboyant headlines they accumulate, is still a human being grappling with the same worries, the same disappointments, and the same hopes as anyone else. For Lady Sylvia Ashley, the repeated reinventions of her identity reflect a woman determined never to settle for a life she didn't find fulfilling. That alone can be inspiring, if a bit tragic, especially when you consider that so many of her ambitions ended in heartbreak or disillusionment. What we're left with is a mixture of awe, sympathy, and curiosity. There are still aspects of her life that invite debate. Was she truly in love with each of these men, or were her motivations more complicated? Did she find in the end any lasting inner peace? While we can't definitively answer those questions, we can glean from her story a sense of determination. She was someone who wasn't content to remain stuck in one place, whether geographically, socially, or emotionally. And whether one admires her or not, that trait is undeniably intriguing and resonates across decades. As we bring this to a close, I hope you feel a new sense of connection to Lady Sylvia Ashley. She might have walked in and out of the frames of famous men, but she carried her own essence, shaped by triumphs, scandals, heartbreaks, and fleeting joys. If nothing else, she reminds us that everyone has a heart beating behind the tabloid sensationalism, that each glamorous face in a photograph holds a world of private longings and struggles. And though many decades have passed since she last graced a Hollywood gathering, her memory continues in the old stories, in the recollections of those who glimpsed her sparkling smile, and in the abiding curiosity of those who still marvel at the golden days of early Hollywood. Her journey may have been complicated, but it was undoubtedly hers, and that, in the end, is what makes her story endure for those who care to look beyond the headlines and see the person at the heart of it all.